Welcome. Emotions are everywhere. So how can we be smarter with our feelings? The answer is emotional intelligence, or EQ. We're delighted you're watching. Because at 6 seconds, we're working towards 1 billion people practicing the skills of emotional intelligence. Can we count you in? Here on 6 Seconds channel, you'll find practical skills for work and life, inspiration for today, and support to build a better future for all.
Welcome, everyone. Today, as every Tuesday, we go live with a different topic. And I'm excited about today's topic because of urgency around it. We're going to be talking about social emotional learning and how it became even more essential now. But really, we're going to dig into the questions of why is that the case, and how does that work now, especially with the environment around the education system changing so drastically. And so we're going to have experts join us, and we're going to talk about all these different aspects from different points of view. I always look forward to these live streams, and I'm glad to welcome you here today. Remember to subscribe and like the video if you want to support 6 Seconds, and share the link for the YouTube or Facebook live stream with your friends. Just a quick announcement. This is we're going to be changing a little bit the live stream schedule. And so today and next week are going to be the last 2 live streams for this block of live streams on Tuesday morning. We're going to move to a Friday starting in November. So we'll let you know more in detail about that. But yeah, I'm excited for today's conversation, and I want to welcome Joshua Friedman, which is going to be our moderator for today's panel.
Thanks, Tom. I'm really excited about the plans for November for the stream. And we're needing to take a break in October because I am teaching like 5 different certification courses in October. And so that's good news, but it just made it very hard to do our stream also. So we will miss you in October and back in November with some really fun and powerful content. I wanted to just say today before we started, I don't know how many of you are feeling this. I was feeling pretty devastated about the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsberg. I think especially in this era where it just seems like not that many people care about what's true, and a lot of people seem to just think law is a convenience. The idea of somebody who truly believed in equal justice under the law. And just somebody who had that internal integrity, and whether you agreed with her politics or not, when you read stories about her, what you see is here's a person who was less interested in political perspective and more interested in the idea of justice, in the ideal of justice. So I feel a tremendous loss. And I think it's really pertinent to our conversation today about how we support kids who care not about the externalities, about what things look like, about their status, about skin color, about what society says is popular, but instead care about who they really are as people and supporting one another to be like that. The other thing that I want to mention is that we're in the middle of the Jewish high holidays. And for those who come from a Jewish tradition, this is a time for repairing relationships, a time for building community, a time for the work of social emotional learning. So all that's happening. And with that, what I've been seeing from teachers who I follow on social media is a sense of being really overwhelmed and trying very hard for their kids and the families they serve. And parents are struggling, and kids are struggling, and teachers are struggling, and administrators are struggling. And it's not clear that it's really working the way anybody wants it to. Now, for decades at 6 Seconds, literally, we've been advocating that social emotional learning is the foundation of a great place to learn, is the foundation for education. And in the pandemic, I think that two truths have become more evident. One is that SEL is essential for kids, for educators, for families. The academic part of learning just does not work as well if we don't have that social and emotional foundation. And the second is that it's incredibly difficult to do this work today. Whether you're talking about distance learning or blended learning or some other COVIDized form of education, whether you have kids getting packets dropped off and listening to lessons on the radio, whether you have kids just not in school at all over the world, people are struggling with this. And I think this is a time where we need more creativity and more heart in the work that we're doing. So how do we move forward? And I'm very excited, despite my sad introduction, about today's panel, because we have two educators who are really on the front lines and doing this work in very powerful ways. And we have two educators who are backstage doing this work also in very powerful ways. Annabelle Jensen is my mentor and the founding president of 6 Seconds, who's been an advocate for social emotional learning before there was such thing as social emotional learning. And so I'm delighted to welcome our panelists to our conversation today. And two of our panelists are from the Summer Principals Academy at Columbia Teachers College, where we are working on emotional intelligence for aspiring school principals with the idea of starting with ourselves, that being the foundation of all of the work that we do. So I'm really grateful to see you all here today. And what I wanted to start with is, what's something that's become very important to you in your work as an educator that's become even more precious to you as a result of the pandemic? And who would like to go first? Annabelle, thank you.
Well, Josh, you made me cry in the very beginning. Ruth is one of my heroes, and not only did she stand for justice and integrity, but she also is, in my opinion, a role model for optimism. She met and conquered cancer multiple times, and so I'm personally going to miss her every day. So Josh introduced me. He told you that I was a founding member of 6 Seconds, and you've now heard about my favorite competency, which is optimism. And what do I think is important? This ingredient that I'm going to talk about has been important forever, and it is the importance of human relationships in education. Human relationships are the heart of education, and the challenge with Zoom is there is that flight syndrome that goes on, and the problem with masks is that you can't see their faces and you can't touch them. And so I'm missing the human relationships. I'm missing the heart of education.
Thank you, Annabelle. Ashley, how about you?
Oh, yeah, I'll definitely jump in next. Right when the pandemic and all the uprisings and everything that we've all collectively experienced over the 6 months was really, happening. Bettina Love, author and professor, she said that the pandemic had kind of forced the humanity to be brought back to education, where we're focusing on people, not focusing so much on some of the things we were all focused on before, like all the technology was locked up. Overnight, we distributed all the technology. Testing and social and emotional learning and the well-being of everyone has just been prioritized. And I think we've amplified the need and kind of just forced school districts, school systems, and schools to prioritize social and emotional learning, self-care, and bringing the humanity back to education and SEL specifically. I know SEL has been a buzzword and has gained a lot of traction, but not just using it as a tool to modify or control behavior, but focusing on prioritizing the personal, social, and emotional needs of not only students, but staff. And emphasizing the self-care of staff is something that is like really on our mind. It's our priority right now. And we're not just talking about taking care of students, we're talking about taking care of ourselves so that we can better take care of our students. And as a dean of a special education high school, you know, self-care is something that I've always like tried to do better at, but this is a crucial time where we really have to bring the humanity back to teaching and see each other the way that we want, you know, people to see us during this difficult time.
I have so many snaps for that. I'm just like, yeah, yes, put that in a bottle. Let's just get that.
No, I completely agree with what Ashley was saying. Bringing it back to the humanity of education. What I miss personally are the casual run-ins in the hallways. I'm on a board of a school at this point, and I'm new. I can't have those informal introductions any longer. So I think, as Ashley was saying, the intentionality of reaching out and having a check-in, saying, hey, we've never met. I'd love to just get to know you for 10, 15 minutes, learn all about you. We don't need to talk about school. I just care about, you know, your values and your history, and tell me about you, whether, you know, your family and how you're doing. And then we can get to the work later. I think that's been really what I've missed the most.
And maybe that is actually part of the work.
Mm-hmm.
Norma, what's something that's become more important for you?
For me, I think it has become a lot of validation more than more important. I think the humanization of students has been a big passion of mine, but the humanization of teachers at this point, right? Like, we want them to produce, but they also have to take care of themselves. And I love that what you said, that it was just like technology, but like we have to keep them, and with the key and the other key, and now they're out. That's how learning about social emotional learning has to be out there. Like, now, this is the time that you got to show it.
It's actually a really wonderful metaphor to think about power in the way that we're trying to control learners and trying to control learning and having power over students. And that that model perhaps has its roots in colonialism and patriarchy and racism, and maybe there's a different way to think about our relationship, and what is our job as educators isn't to control. Ashley, you want to take a shot at that?
I want to say something about that, because I always have said that teachers, that the second place after, when you, especially as an immigrant, you come into the country, school is where you get colonized once again. School is where you get the work, you know, when it happens again, what is processed. I'm in Mexico right now, and the colonialism that is happening in the surface, and again, is happening, and our emotions are trapped, and we cannot talk about it because we don't see it. We just feel it, right? We just know it's wrong. We just know. I think as teachers, when you start teaching and you know, like, that's wrong. That's why Bettina Love said, loving is not enough. You have to act. So I think your emotions get trapped. Like, what's going on? Because school is the trap. Like, why are we trying to control something instead of understanding? Where does that come from? Where does that temper tantrum comes from the kid, from that parent that is frustrated from going to 3-5 schools that is been getting no, and your kid's a problem, and you're a problem, and you know, but never the school.
So somebody just put in the chat about, you know, who's writing the history books. And in some ways, schools could be a place of opening and liberation, or they could be a place of limiting. And when we think about kids taking place in society, is that a place where that's truly open? Or is that like, no, take your place, stay in your place?
Definitely, Josh. I feel like obviously schools are like a microcosm of our societies. And, if we don't feel safe showing up completely as ourselves in society, that definitely, transfers over into school as well. So you think about someone feeling comfortable showing up as themselves. You think about someone feeling comfortable, feeling their emotion, the full spectrum of their emotions, and having the space to talk about it and emote even. And it feels like in schools, a lot of times we don't have time or we don't have space, for people to feel what they feel or emote or really connect with the things that are going on in the real world. And I think we have to break down those power dynamics in schools too, and make these safe spaces, home places for our kids and for our staff, where we can show up as ourselves. We can feel the full spectrum of our emotions. But the way we set up the school day, the way we set up, our programs, it feels like we don't have time for these things. And I think we're being forced to shift and prioritize feelings, self-care, social and emotional needs. And that does disrupt the patriarchal and white supremacist views too, because we're humanizing everyone through this experience, and we're disrupting that entire power cycle as we do social and emotional learning better in school.
Annabelle.
Well, the pandemic is painful. And when something is painful, it can define us and overcome our whole lives. It can destroy us, or it can strengthen us. I serve on or involved fairly intimately with 3 different schools. And I am surprised about the fear that exists within the teachers and how scared they are. I've been in faculty meetings in the last week in which a teacher burst into tears. And it's like there's no one really there to support her and sustain her and help her to deal with this fear and the anxiety that they have. One of the schools that I'm involved with just opened with the masks, and 2 days later they've got a COVID case. So now they're all terrified. So it seems to me that teachers are existing in this moment in time, which is terribly scary, and that people are not helping them to deal with that fear.
And an amplification of, we've talked on the show many times about the idea that the pandemic or crisis shines a bright light. And in that bright light, we're seeing some things that maybe already existed, but now we're seeing it more clearly.
Like they're under a microscope. Yeah.
Yeah, and that sense of not feeling supported, maybe it existed before, but it was kind of okay. Sherilyn, what are you hearing from your teacher friends?
Exhaustion. I think they went into the summer.
It's only September.
Oh man, because you have the trauma fatigue, right? And it's ongoing, and this is a different type of trauma than most trauma studies are focused on natural disasters. But this is something where it's completely surrounding us in all aspects of our social and educational well-being, and it's permeating, and it's not going to end anytime soon. So like what Annabelle was saying, this purgatory, this uncertainty for the children, for the staff, for the administrators, school leaders, my hearts go out to them right now. Some of them are put in positions where they're making decisions about people's lives and livelihoods. And children's lives and livelihood, and their futures. And so I don't envy them. I think they have a lot of pressure on their backs, and the social emotional learning helps explore, like you all were talking about, the power dynamics in all of these relationships. So we have the systemic power imbalances, and then you also have between the student-teacher relationship and then the faculty-administrator, superintendent relationship. We always have to come to the table and say, okay, take stock of the power in the room and then move forward.
I think it's such an intriguing shift when the kids aren't in the room and you cannot use your old strategies of control. I saw some high school teachers who Ashley and Norma know chatting on Facebook the other day saying, just turn on your camera, and like literally you have no control. And I wonder what that's like for teachers who maybe are used to a power dynamic where they perceive that they have or supposed to have control. Ashley?
I think one of the 21st century skills, right, is adaptability. Little that we know. That we, like this. And, there's people who are in pain, in a lot of pain, that I know personally know, because they do not want, they're resisting the adaptability. They don't recognize that school will never be the same. And they keep like longing from when we get back to the building and we have recess and we have this and we have that. I don't, just like when the shootings, high schools were never the same. After the shootings, high schools were not the same. After, like things like that. Like in our case, for example, after immigration rates and all that stuff, for some communities with this administration, we don't have the same life. 9/11, different life for immigrant communities, right? So they keep resisting of like, just let it go. But it's hard for them to know what is that they're letting go. What is that I'm trying to hold on so much? Is it control? Is it, life? Just my life that I liked it the way it was. Even though I complain all the time.
I so support your idea about the importance of adaptability and flexibility. And then I would add to that creativity. Creativity. In the past, teachers relied on their presence. I'm here, and have that influence. And now you've got to be more creative about what it is that you do to get people's attention, to get people to focus, to get people to be involved. And you can't do what you did. We have a lot of parents saying to teachers, well, get the kids involved. And the teachers are saying, well, it's my responsibility to make them turn on the camera or to have them do something fun. But it is their responsibility.
Yeah.
I definitely think people that were, dependent on that token economy or that contingency behavior management, they're struggling to find ways to engage with students during this time. How do I get them to attend? How do I get them to turn the camera on? If they're at home and they have unlimited access to technology now, they have unlimited access to their preferred activities and items, how do I motivate them to sign on with me? And I think it comes back to relationships. And if you're prioritizing relationships and you're prioritizing people, then that's going to kind of eliminate that power dynamic. So people that were focusing on the contingency before, you have to shift to relationships and nurturing those relationships, because you don't have as much to hold over students' head. There's no carrot to dangle. The relationship is everything. That's what's going to keep them showing up, signing on, and engaging.
Well, I'm just thinking, in our book, The Vital Organization, we talked about this in business, this shift from things like demanding trust to earning trust. And I'm wondering, what is that shift for educators from the power of control to what? What's the new paradigm where the students are, like it or not, the students are now in charge? So what's our job?
I want to comment on. Oh, go ahead, Norma.
I was just going through that in my head, like a million thoughts, right? Because I think as an administrator, and when you're a new administrator, the trust with your teachers is barely there, right? When you're just brand new school, and you don't know what you're doing, because there's no administrator that walks in and is like, I got it. So I don't know, like this shift of trust, back into humanization, back into liberation, it has to come from top to bottom. We cannot expect students to liberate us. We have to get from top to bottom to how that liberation is going to happen. We have to start modeling in maybe small pieces, maybe, because I also think, as a principal, you just don't want to give freedom on on relationships, because then you get, in my head, it's like pedophile. You know, like what is the teacher? Why is the teacher talking to the student at 11 o'clock at night? Especially like high schoolers, like, you know, I don't like, where do we start? It's a lot that administrators are having to deal with personally, emotionally. Like, how do you let go of a lot of stuff that they tell you the teachers cannot do this, cannot do that, you cannot, you know, in Mexico, that sometimes they don't even show pictures of the schools. So it feels more like the transparency is not there, but it's happening, but we don't see it. So I don't know. I'm just like, as an administrator, my head is like, okay, like, how do I just okay, we're all gonna be.
So there's a lot to be afraid of, legitimately.
Yes.
And one reaction to that fear is to try to control. And to try to control things that are maybe not the things we really need to control anyway, but at least to give an illusion of control.
Yeah.
Ashley, you are, in addition to your advocacy for SEL, you were a student in one of the pioneering SEL programs in the country. And so I'm curious if you can put yourself back in those days. What did you learn in Wings that taught you about this self-liberation that Norma's talking about?
Okay, yeah. First of all, shout out to Wings for Kids. It was an organization I had the pleasure to be a Wings girl as a child, and then I also returned as a program director for Wings for Kids for 3 years. So I think even in 1997, you know, Wings was all about not putting yourself in a cage, you know, being who you are, not being afraid to, you know, let your wings out and be yourself. And I think when we are showing up as our full selves, if we do have those safe spaces in which to do so, that is I think the jumping off point for building trust, right? So I can't feel safe. I can't build trust if I don't feel safe. And, you know, I can't feel safe if I don't feel like I can show up as myself and be myself. And I think that's what Wings was all about at that time, was giving, you know, kids a space, you know, to be a kid and to be themselves. And that's where it starts. And that goes for students, but that also goes on an organizational level, companies, businesses, those things too. Simple things to build trust, create safe spaces without judgment for everyone. I think following through, simple things. So if you say you're going to do something, try to follow through. If you just do that 1 or 2 times, people start to think of you as a dependable person. You tell a student, okay, I'm going to check on you at the end of the day. Then you make sure you do that. Then they know oh, yep, she said she was going to come back to me and she really did do it. Learning about each other, being vulnerable, creating really fun and wild relationship building experiences. And we can do some of those things online, which I'm sure we can get to. And then I think engaging in like co-regulation and mindfulness practices together. And that also, like, we keep saying human, we're bringing the humanity back to it. You have needs and I do too. And this is a safe space where we can all get our needs met while we learn about each other and we engage in some personal growth too. And I think that's what Wings did really well. I remember as a kid, and also being able to be a program director and facilitating those relationship building experiences between staffs and students and between staff and staff. And I think that's what we need. I'm on, like, these lights are like solar powered or like on a timer. I'm going to turn it back on. But yeah, that Wings, check them out if you haven't. But I think that was the foundation. Thank you.
And this piece about connectedness and trust coming from the inside. Annabelle, I want to go to Huda's question about trauma fatigue. And somebody else pointed out compassion fatigue is also real. And just fatigue. And I know you have been just struggling now feels like forever with getting physically healthier. And I imagine that you can really relate to this sense of fatigue. And so I'm curious, for those who don't know, Annabelle was diagnosed with pneumonia a few months ago, which may be COVID, maybe pneumonia, but it's been a struggle to breathe. And so, what's your advice about fatigue?
Well, what a great question, Josh. I think I'm going to start by saying that when I created 6 Seconds, I wanted to change the world. And then the longer I was in the organization and the more I did research about emotional intelligence and what's going on and happening, I discovered that what's really important is I have to change myself. And that's in relationship to my disease. And so in terms of dealing with fatigue, just being totally exhausted because I'm on my way to a CAT scan this afternoon to find out what else is going on, is to take initiative and actually be active and actually to do physical exercise. For me, that has been the major difference, is to get up out of my bed and make sure I get my walk in, make sure that I do my exercise, make sure I pump my iron, make sure that I do those things that help me. My favorite neuroscientist is John Medina, and he talks about how important it is that we do something physically every 10 to 20 minutes so that it helps us to retain our focus and helps us to understand where we are and where we're going. So my recommendation is do something, be active.
And of course, when we are not feeling energized, whether we're physically sick or we're emotionally exhausted, it's extra hard to get up and move.
Right.
And I find myself just wanting to lay in bed, honestly. And so
I've actually made some pacts with people, Josh. Okay, I'm on my phone. I'm going to exercise for 10 minutes and then I'll call Sherilyn and say, okay, Sherilyn, I did my exercises, and she pats me on the back. Sometimes we have to do that in order to make it work.
Yeah. And again, that relational context. I want to go back to this term you mentioned, Norma, about colonization and decolonization. And this is an idea I've heard about before, but I didn't really know very much about. I still don't feel like I know very much about it. My 21-year-old is working to educate me. What is, for you, the intersection between decolonization and social emotional learning? And what is decolonization? And then what is the intersection?
For me, there's obviously people who study this and who write books about this. This is not what I do. But in our process, in our school, when we start seeing the kids coming to our school and we start talking about trauma, we start learning that what it was a lot of happening to them was that the lack of cultural competency and trying to make them be whoever they were not or behave certain ways as the mainstream make them bad kids, made them unfit for certain schools. High-performing schools were not allowing that kind of behavior, that kind of expressions or things like that. So when we start looking at it like that, that is in our community. We do that. We did that 500 years ago. So we started questioning that what was happening in our school. So in our school, we started putting a lot of attention to emotions that were, when people ask me, you're trauma-informed school, I said, yes, but we don't do trauma-informed as the child, like, because most of our kids come from immigrant families. It's not like they're coming in traumatized because of immigration. They're coming in from other schools because they were traumatized because their father was called by immigration, and the teacher, not knowing what to do, created a bigger deal than it was, trying to help, so for us, decolonizing is understanding and dismantling layer by layer of who we are and where we come from, and then pick and choose what I'm going to have and what I'm not going to have. For example, it's a big movement in the Latino community right now, not in all of them, but in some pockets of the Latino community, of dismantling the whole hitting children. That's not discipline. That was not discipline for us. So where does that come from? the whole allegiance to African American community. Where does that come from? So that's dismantling the whole process. That's how they colonize us. They make me think that Audrey will be my enemy, right? Like we shouldn't be working together. We shouldn't be taking care of our children together. And we have a lot more in common than what we've been taught. So that's a process of decolonization that Ashley and I would be working in hand to hand, because we see each other more like sisters than we don't. But that's like a big concept, like Latino community and African American community have been put to fight instead of working together, because it's easier to keep us in our place.
I love your comment about being sisters, and that we all should be sisters or siblings together. When I was teaching graduate school, one night, it was the first night of class, and I'm doing all these exercises, icebreakers and etc. And this one young African American woman makes this comment, and I run across the room and give her a hug, a simple hug, and she bursts into tears. And I think to myself, oh my gosh, what have I done? What did I say? What did I do? What did I promote here that I didn't really want to? And so I turned to her and apologized. And I say, I am so sorry, whatever it is, I didn't mean. She said, it's not that. She said, I've been in school for over 20 years. This is the first time anyone has ever hugged me.
Yes.
Ever. And it is the first time any white teacher has ever hugged me. Any white teacher.
Yes.
We don't have enough human interaction. We don't have each other enough.
So they call the humanization of ourselves and others.
So in this social system that is in some ways grown over centuries to divide people and keep certain people having more power, people who look like me in particular, there's all these stories and norms to divide people from themselves, to not feel, to not express, to not have freedom, and to not be represented. And Ashley, I want to just take a moment here and share. Let me see if I have it open. Sorry, technology fun. I wanted to share your Instagram. And could you just tell a little bit about what you're doing here and why?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So if you're looking at some of these images here, these are considerations for building self-awareness in your classroom or in your organization in ways that are culturally affirming. And I've been a teacher for the past 6 years. And before that, I worked for Wings for Kids. And when I became a teacher, I found that social and emotional learning and building that into my instruction explicitly, but also in other ways, was really needed. And I found that I was getting the students to respond to me positively as a new teacher, but I also saw a void in social and emotional learning that is representative and is affirming to Black and Brown students specifically. So on Teachers Pay Black Teachers, I'm working with a friend, Michaela Amato, and we're producing these images that are more representative of our students and of mindfulness and of topics that are related to self-care and social and emotional learning. And these are, Black and Brown figures of all shapes and sizes. And I found that there was a void for that. In creating lessons, teacher-created materials, if I search for Black teenagers, only mugshots will come up. And it's something that, every time I'm creating lessons, it's hard to find these positive images. So we're creating them ourselves. And in creating the images, we're making them into memes that also provide considerations for SEL. But another focus is actually having these individual images as a bank or a gallery for educators to use.
And
I love those. I love those. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing those with us. How do I get a copy of them so I can share them with others?
Oh, you can. You were creating a whole gallery. So you can have the memes, the slides that are on Instagram, but also each individual image in those slides are also separate. And those are available that you can plug right into your instructional materials and make them look more representative for our students. Because what we have to remember is that historically, we've been told that certain things aren't for us. Like mindfulness has been, pushed in this Eurocentric way, even though mindfulness and yoga and some of these practices aren't even from European countries. Nutrition and taking care of ourselves and self-care, that's for everyone. That's for us. That's for our communities that have been the most marginalized. And I think having those visual representations that look like us are really important for students, but for everyone.
Right. Everybody should be visible.
Exactly.
I wanted to give a shout out to Saugat, who's here in the chat, I noticed. And Saugat sent me a lovely note yesterday of sending love from the Himalayas. And two of our board members, our founding board members, have been very involved in education in that region. And so I shared with them what Saugat's doing in the region. And George McCown wrote back and said, wait, but they invented SEL. And, I think this really speaks to reconnecting with traditions that we have in all cultures. We have traditions that are about care for self and one another, traditions about connectedness. And, I think borrowing from other traditions can be very powerful if it's done in a respectful way. And at the same time, I think there's tremendous power in finding our own cultural traditions, I don't like that. Because I see myself as somebody coming from lots of different cultures. It's not like I have one set of cultural traditions, but within this realm of my lived experience and my ancestry, there's a lot of traditions that I can draw on. And I think I would wish that everybody could have that.
And as someone who develops SEL curriculum attempting to be global, if that's even a thing, right? So I think when it comes down to what makes it effective, it's localization, customization. It's the same thing where we're saying the kids have all the power now because they're in charge of turning their screens on and off. They can decide to cue in and try. But it comes back to intrinsic motivation. And I saw Dula wrote in the chat, I completely agree with when you're talking about power, if you can teach kids how to find their own power within themselves and teachers and connect it to their immediate passions. And if it's highly regionalized and highly local, even better, right? Because it's what's tangible to them, what's meaningful to them. And the more you can connect their lived experiences with what you're teaching, that just helps the brain store more information. So there's a brain-based reason why you should do this as well.
I love that you spoke about, intrinsic motivation and what is the hook? How are we motivating students to want to connect with us? And I saw in the chat that, some of the people that have joined us today were looking for some ways to connect or give a virtual hug, or how can we motivate students? So some ideas, I'm sorry, I can hear some feedback. Okay. Some ideas are like one of my colleagues in the spring, he started doing weekly virtual dance parties and on Fridays, and he would have a virtual dance party online, and then there'd be a winner. He would do a poll on Zoom, and then the winner would get a pizza sent to their house, because we're not together, but, we're still, rewarding and building that experience. I started doing movie nights online. So the first one was The Hate You Give, because that's the text I read with my class last year. But we started one movie night and the students loved it. They were chatting in the chat box the whole time. A question of the day, Google form check-ins on emotions. That should really be daily, for our students. Visual schedules available to everyone, or even finding ways online to recreate the feeling of getting to check something off and really feeling like you completed something or you overcame the whole list of assignments you had. I do a question of the day. So each day, a funny or silly or thought-provoking question on gratitude, to help the students, all discuss around the same topic starting off. Engaging in mindfulness practice, you can still do that online. Apps like Headspace or Liberate. And then just a lot of share outs, weekly awards at the end of the week, motivating students and having ways to celebrate them and bring joy into your virtual space. And then also bringing in a lot of guest speakers, doing research on topics and building a whole unit. And at the end of the unit, after the students have engaged in all the learning activities, having a guest speaker. People don't have to take off work anymore to engage with you and your students. You can invite them in for an hour. Your students are prepared. They can ask questions and interview people. So there's a lot of ways to build relationships and resilience in virtual spaces too.
One of the things I really appreciate that, Ashley, I think the key thing here is the intentionality to say, it's not just going to be about the explicit content. We're not just going to focus on reading this chapter. We're going to also talk about our experience of that. And that fuels that internal motivation. There's a tool that I've been enjoying. Many of you have heard me say a zillion times, let's not talk about how are you feeling. Let's talk about what are some of your feelings. And I actually wanted to try that right here with you all live on our chat. I just put a link in the chat to a little Mentimeter. And if you click that link, you should see a question where it asks you for what are some of your feelings right now. And so everyone who's watching, if you would please go click that link, hopefully you'll get to type in 3 feelings that you have. And we'll come back to this in a second after people have gotten a chance to type. Sherilyn, what's one of the strategies you are finding effective in SEL virtually?
Ashley, I just want to say thank you. These are some creative, fun, and invigorating. You have people from all over the world writing in like, yes, I'm going to do this in my country. So thank you. So my experience right now is I'm tutoring my niece in social emotional learning. So she's 10 years old. She lives in a different state, different time zone, and she's exhausted, right? At the end of the day, and I pretty much just get this. So, most teachers do inventories at the beginning. What are your favorite books? What are your favorite movies? What do you like? Oh, you like superheroes? Cool. Which ones? Why? So spending time at the beginning, creating those inventories of all your students, then when it's time to connect back, let their project choice connect with their personal passions. So, for example, another way to shake things up is if you have a set curriculum for the day and it's 45 minutes, let your students vote on which part they want in which order. It doesn't matter for you. You said, we could do the worksheet first or we could do the game. Let's vote. Let everyone vote. And then the motivation is just skyrockets because you don't care as a teacher which order, but for them, you listened and you were attuned to their needs and desires. And right away, they're going to focus more and be more attentive because they had some control.
So we're getting a feeling cloud from the question. And the more frequently stated feelings are bigger. And I think this excited and anxious as the 2 biggest feelings really makes sense with our conversation today, right? This combination. Interestingly, anxiety has a very negative connotation for people. But anxiety is actually a feeling that has tremendous value for us as people. It tells us, I need to pay attention to something. There's a threat. I'm not exactly sure what it is. And so it's a signal to say, look around, figure out the problem. Figure out what's important, figure out what the threat is, figure out what I really need to protect. And I actually think that just makes tons of sense, that's what one of the major feelings. And I'm also excited to see excited there. Anyone else have a comment about our feeling cloud?
And the fact, Josh, I'm looking at all the words and that we don't talk about it. Voice are not taught to share their feelings. They cannot say, I'm scared. They cannot say, I'm talking especially like teenage boys that mostly work with. And now I have one at home that just gets very in a bad mood. And I'm just like, what are you feeling? His frustration with classes, his frustration here in Mexico with the internet. He wants to go back to the States just for the internet. If he could just bring the internet, he would be just fine. But being able to okay, show me here, have some words that they can see him, just point it out, this is what I'm feeling, and he walked away. Because as much as I try as a mother to, the whole men up and mentors for him and all stuff that can talk about feelings and all that, he can do that, but the rest of the society tells him not to talk about it. The rest of the society still very boxed, as much as we want to say that for boys, they can, now they can say who they are and they can express themselves. Actually, is not true. Especially our Black and brown boys are really scared. Are really scared of what's happening with the police. But they don't have a space as many times to talk about it. And just to give them the words to be able to say, tell me in this wall of words, just point it out.
Ashley,
or in, for class.
Ashley, if you had Norma's son in your class, what's something you might do to help with this expanding emotional expression? And then I know you're teaching in a school that's focused on special education, and so I imagine this building vocabulary is even more challenging.
Right. I definitely wanted to respond to Norma anyway, Josh, so thank you. I am in a special education high school, and, as we know, Black and brown boys are, referred to special education at sometimes alarming rates. So my school is about 80% male. And so when you were speaking about your son, that really resonated with me. And I just think about some of the emotions that our kids feel in school, being very aware of their special education placement and just about everything that's going on in their community in general. So I definitely think it's important to build in opportunities for students to talk about their feelings and lessons. And I do that by using, reality pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching so that we can address the trauma of systemic racism and oppression in general. So I talk to my students about special education. I talk to them about racism, about food deserts, about violence against communities. And then I open up space for them to reflect on current events and about things that are going on, in their realities. And I think that, that's the way our students have feelings, but if we just present it through the lens of this is what's going on, this is the history of education or the history of our country. How do you feel about that? Are there any connections that you can make from the text to yourself, or from this text to the world, or from you to anything that your classmates are sharing? So that's what I do. I try to tie in what's going on and then allow that space for them to say oh, I've seen that before, or I felt that way before. I remember, when I was in middle school and I was getting in a lot of trouble, and then we had a meeting and I went to a different school, and opening up, and they have it inside of them. And I think it's just allowing those opportunities to reflect on systemic violence and oppression, and they'll make the connections themselves a lot of times, which can be heartbreaking but also empowering.
And the validation that that light bulb that you see when they go oh, so it's not me.
Exactly.
It's not me. You are taking tons of weight that they had, that they feel guilty, that they feel dumb, that they feel all these things that they told them it was their responsibility or their parents' responsibility. Mm-hmm. My school, by the way, was also 70% boys. So that tells you, that is not an isolated, just an Ashley's situation, but any school that is teaching or is taking kids who don't care if they're special ed or not, that they're coming in and we're embracing all of that, tends to be mostly boys. 70%.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right, Norma. We can't tell students to love themselves or control themselves without, addressing systematic violence and history. So I totally agree with you. And that's where this SEL piece ties in directly with culturally responsive teaching and reality pedagogy.
Yeah.
I was thinking,
Absolutely. One of the things that I had an all boys class one year, and I just put myself in the research. I'm like, okay, what do they need? How should I teach it? I'm like, okay, one of the top 3 things they need is a positive male role model, of which I and the rest of the teachers could not provide this. So I showed them the research. I said, what should we do about this, boys? And they're like, oh, we should have Friday talks where some different man comes in and shares, or maybe we could have mentors. Okay, so I let them kind of design their own program, because if that's what they needed, and I right away couldn't provide it, we needed to get working. We need to find those connections for those kids.
well, unbelievably,
I just have to say one word, Josh. All of you have identified that, males and the females are being neglected here. In gifted schools, the biggest percentage of kids are also male. So I just want to point out and applaud Josh. He surrounded himself with females here this morning. So hooray, hooray. Let's have more females out there marching along and leading the way.
yes. We are unbelievably almost out of time. I don't know quite how that happened. I have like 7 other questions on my list that I wanted to talk about. But maybe for now, we'll have to come back together. For now, what's your suggestion or wish for educators who are wanting to do this work, wanting to connect in this more human way? What's your final tip or wish for them as we're closing up today?
Well, everybody knows what I'm going to say, so I'll just go ahead and say it, Josh, okay? So once upon a time in my 80 years, somewhere along the way, I heard that a goal was a wish or a dream that had been written down. So I want to point out that I feel the same way about optimism. Optimism is a hope, defined, clarified, explained. It gives you the steps. So I want optimism so that there's more hope for everybody in the world.
Thank you, Annabelle. Sherilyn?
My wish would be that this year, all those stakeholders, including the students, think of themselves as role models for others in coping with crisis. Because the minute you say you're a leader, you're showing other people what it means to do that. If everyone sits up a little straighter and they walk into a room with a new sense of purpose, and if that becomes the blanket purpose for all the parties, then I think conversations and goals and academics will also fall into place.
I would say self-care, prioritizing building relationships and also just your personal well-being over compliance and assignments. And that goes for staff and students, Our focus is we want to be taking care of ourselves and exploring the best ways that work for us to take care of ourselves and cope with the stress of everything that's going on. So prioritizing that well-being and relationships over compliance and exploring different ways to do that together. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have to always be aware of our power, privilege, and biases as we're forming these relationships. Because when you get to know more about people, you're still going to have those thoughts pop in that are judgmental. And we always have to stop and check those biases. We all have them. So we can't build intentional, truthful, nurturing, and trusting relationships unless we identify and acknowledge power and privilege within dynamics as well.
Well, for me, grace, right? Everybody needs to have grace, needs to give grace, needs to live in grace right now, because we're not going to make it. We have to take one day at a time, literally. Some days are good, some days are bad, and that's okay, because that is life. And I think in the United States specifically, we were used to very pragmatic days that we had the expectation that they had to be the same, even if they were not, that we were living in this dream of like accomplishments and goals that need to be met and all this stuff. And it was just let's be honest, and let's be honest with ourselves. That was just like a cloud that lived around us when the rest of the world was completely different. So I think it's bringing us back to reality of like, we gotta give grace, and we gotta live in grace. So the judgment doesn't happen. So the optimist is the space for optimism. That for me is really hard. I'm really working and being optimist and being like, we're gonna be okay. So
I just wanted to say that this conversation has lifted me up and increased my sense of hope and optimism and compassion. And I'm grateful to get to have this time with you and all of you who are here live, and all of you who are here watching later. Thank you for joining us. And I just am deeply grateful that we get to do this, even though we don't know how, even though it's hard, even though we're in a state of learning and needing to remember that grace. The fact that we can be doing this work and learning how to do it together, that is truly.
It was a privilege and honor to meet you, Ashley and Norma. And Josh and Cheryl Lynn know how much I love them. So thank you. I thought this was a interesting, intriguing conversation and would love to continue it.
Nice to meet you, Annabelle. It was an honor.
Nice to meet you guys too. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Take care.
And thank you, everyone. And wow, what an amazing gift this morning. I have to say, like every week, it seems cheesy, and I don't think I would say this if I didn't believe it. Like every week, there is so much to learn from these conversations. It reminds us, why do we do this? Why do we provide this platform for these conversations? So today it really reminded me of the power of creativity, the importance of adaptability, grounded optimism, and passion and love for one another, recognizing our humanity. And sometimes we tend to put things in boxes where education and the school system is so different than other things, but it's really not. Like, we should remember that this applies to our families, this applies to our businesses. How can we actually adapt this to our reality? And so I'll leave you with that. And so put in the comment below this video, how does that apply to your reality? What can you do? How can you apply these things that we talked about today? And let us know. See you next week.
If this was helpful, would you please comment, like, share, and subscribe? The Emotional Intelligence Network is your community to grow and practice EQ. At 6 seconds, that means being smarter with feelings. And we're here to provide practical, proven EQ tools so workplaces, schools, and people can thrive everywhere in the world. Be sure to visit 6seconds.org to find the complete suite of resources, assessments, and programs. Thank you for watching.